Some people smile because they're happy. Others smile because if they stop, they might fall apart. At exactly 6:17 p.m., Claire Bennett was smiling when the call came. The dinner rush had just begun at Maple and Ash, a busy Manhattan restaurant tucked between a law office and a luxury apartment tower. Plates clinked. Glasses shimmered beneath warm lights. Conversations drifted through the air like soft music. And moving through it all was Claire. Her blonde hair was tied neatly behind her head. Her black apron was spotless despite a 10-hour shift. She greeted every guest with the same calm warmth that had made her a favorite among regular customers. Table 12 needed a refill. Table 7 wanted extra dressing. A family near the window asked for recommendations. Claire handled each request with effortless grace, her smile never wavering. Most people thought she was simply cheerful. Most people were wrong. Her phone vibrated once inside her apron pocket. Claire glanced down. The color drained slightly from her face. For a brief second, something flickered behind her blue eyes. Fear. Not panic. Not surprise. Just the weary fear of someone who had been carrying too much for too long. Then she smiled again. "I'll be right back," she told another waitress before slipping through the kitchen doors. The storage hallway behind the kitchen was narrow and dim. The sounds of the dining room faded into a distant hum. Claire answered the call immediately. "Hi." Her voice was barely above a whisper. The person on the other end spoke for less than 30 seconds. No one heard what was said. No one saw the tears gathering in her eyes. Claire pressed her free hand against the wall. Her shoulders trembled once. Just once. Then silence. When the call ended, she lowered the phone and stared at the floor. The fluorescent light above buzzed softly. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away before it reached her jawline. Another followed. Then another. For a moment she simply stood there, alone with whatever news had just arrived. No dramatic breakdown. No anger. No complaints. Just exhaustion. The kind that settles deep inside a person after years of choosing. Strength over surrender. 3 slow breaths. That was all she allowed herself. Then she straightened her shoulders, adjusted her apron, checked her reflection in the dark screen of her phone, and smiled. By the time Claire pushed open the kitchen doors and stepped back into the dining room, no one could have guessed she had been crying less than 60 seconds earlier. No one except one person. Ethan Caldwell sat alone near the back corner of the restaurant. 42 years old. Founder of one of the largest software companies in America. Worth more money than most people could imagine. His custom suit probably cost more than a month of Claire's rent. He had been coming to Maple and Ash for nearly a year. Same table. Same sparkling water. Same quiet dinners after endless meetings. Ethan noticed details because that was how he built an empire. Patterns mattered. Changes mattered. And Claire had just broken a pattern. He watched as she greeted a couple celebrating an anniversary. He watched her laugh softly at an elderly customer's joke. He watched her carry a tray across the room with perfect balance. To everyone else, she looked exactly the same. But Ethan had seen her face before she returned. He had seen the redness around her eyes, the slight delay in her smile, the tiny hesitation before approaching her next table. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Yet she moved through the evening as though nothing had happened. An hour later, Claire stopped beside his table with her familiar smile. "Can I get you anything else tonight, Mr. Caldwell?" Ethan looked up. For a second, he forgot the question. Because there it was again. That smile. Warm, gentle, unshaken, and somehow sadder than any tears he had ever seen. "No," he said quietly. "I'm fine." Claire nodded and walked away. Ethan watched her disappear into the crowd of diners and candlelight. Around him, the restaurant buzzed with life. But for reasons he couldn't explain, he found himself thinking about the woman who smiled immediately after crying. And for the first time since he'd met her, he wanted to know why. The restaurant finally closed a little after 10 o'clock. Chairs were turned upside down onto tables. The last glasses disappeared into industrial dishwashers. Outside, Manhattan glowed beneath a mist of spring rain, its streets reflecting gold and white lights like liquid mirrors. Claire Bennett finished wiping down the counter and tied off a trash bag with practiced hands. Around her, coworkers laughed about weekend plans and dinner dates. Claire joined their conversations when spoken to. She smiled at the jokes. She wished everyone a good night. She looked exactly like someone whose life was perfectly ordinary. Yet when she thought nobody was watching, she checked her phone 3 times in less than 2 minutes. Ethan noticed. He was still seated at his usual table near the back. A quarterly earnings call had run late, and he had remained long after finishing his meal. Not because of work, because of curiosity. Curiosity was responsible for nearly every major decision he had ever made. It was how he built companies. It was how he spotted opportunities before competitors did. And tonight, that same instinct refused to leave him alone. Claire was gathering menus when another waitress approached her. "You are taking another shift tomorrow?" the woman asked. Claire nodded. "Morning and evening. That will make 12 straight days. I will be okay." "You always say that." Claire laughed softly. "Because it is always true." The other waitress shook her head and walked away. Ethan watched Claire carry a stack of menus toward the office. 12 straight days. 2 shifts tomorrow. No complaints. No visible frustration. Most people in Manhattan were exhausted after a single difficult week. Somehow Claire carried herself as if burdens weighed nothing at all. 20 minutes later, employees began leaving through the rear entrance. One by one, they disappeared into the city night. Claire was the last. She stepped outside beneath a black umbrella and started walking east. Ethan remained inside his car parked across the street. He had no intention of following her. At least that was what he told himself. Then he noticed something strange. Claire passed the subway entrance without slowing down. She passed 2 bus stops. She continued walking through the rain for nearly a mile. Not toward an apartment building. Not toward any residential neighborhood. Toward a small shipping store squeezed between a pharmacy and a laundromat. The lights inside were still on. Ethan watched through the windshield as Claire entered. 10 minutes later, she emerged carrying nothing. Yet her expression had changed. There was relief there. Temporary relief. The kind a person feels after completing an obligation. Curious, Ethan glanced toward the storefront. A sign in the window advertised international shipping and money transfers. He frowned. Then Claire continued walking until she reached a modest brick building several blocks away. She climbed the steps and disappeared inside. Ethan expected her to stay there for the night. Instead, 15 minutes later, she emerged again carrying a large insulated bag. Food containers. She crossed the street and entered another building nearby. 20 minutes passed. Then she came out empty-handed. Another stop followed. Then another. For separate buildings. For deliveries. No payment exchanged. No receipts. No customers waiting. Just Claire quietly dropping off meals before midnight. By the time she finally headed home, it was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning. Ethan sat motionless behind the wheel. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed through the city. None of this made sense. A waitress working double shifts. Secret phone calls. Money transfers. Late-night deliveries. And through all of it, that same gentle smile. Most secrets eventually pointed toward selfishness. Hidden debts. Hidden mistakes. Hidden ambitions. Yet something told Ethan this was different. As Claire disappeared around the corner, he found himself staring after her. For the first time in years, a problem existed that could not be solved with numbers, contracts, or data. It was a human mystery. And somehow, Claire Bennett had become the center of it. The next morning arrived wrapped in gray clouds and the scent of fresh rain lingering over the city. By 7 o'clock, Claire Bennett was already moving through Maple and Ash with the same quiet efficiency she showed every day. Coffee cups filled. Orders appeared before customers had to ask twice. Smiles were offered freely. If anyone had seen her after midnight, carrying meals through unfamiliar neighborhoods, they would never have guessed it from the calm confidence she carried now. The breakfast crowd loved her. An elderly couple requested her section every Thursday. A construction foreman tipped generously because Claire always remembered exactly how he liked his coffee. A young mother with twin boys trusted Claire enough to let her recommend meals for the children. Small things. Ordinary things. Yet somehow Claire made every person feel noticed. Ethan Caldwell sat at his usual table near the window, reviewing financial reports on a tablet. At least that was what it looked like. In reality, he found himself watching Claire far more than the numbers on the screen. The previous night refused to leave his thoughts. Around 9:30, a delivery driver entered carrying a small package. For Claire, he announced. Claire accepted it with visible surprise. It was not large, barely the size of a shoebox. She thanked the driver and carried it into the employee hallway. A few minutes later, she returned empty-handed. Her eyes looked brighter somehow. Relieved. Grateful. Ethan glanced toward the hallway. Another clue. Another piece of a puzzle that refused to fit together. Near noon, the lunch rush began. Every table filled. The restaurant buzzed with energy. During the chaos, Claire accidentally dropped a receipt book. Papers scattered across the floor. Several servers rushed past without noticing. Claire knelt quickly, gathering the pages before anyone could help. But not before one sheet slipped several feet away. Ethan happened to be closest. He picked it up automatically. It was not a restaurant receipt. It appeared to be a transfer confirmation. A payment sent to an unfamiliar name. The amount was substantial, nearly half of what a waitress might earn in a month. Claire reached him before he could read further. "Thank you," she said softly. For a split second, concern flashed across her face. Then the smile returned. The paper disappeared into her apron. Ethan handed it over without comment. Yet questions multiplied. Most people worked extra shifts to improve their lives. Claire seemed to be working extra shifts to support someone else's. Later that afternoon, Ethan stepped outside to take a call. As he ended the conversation, he noticed Claire across the street entering a pharmacy. 20 minutes later, she emerged carrying 2 paper bags. Again, she checked her phone. Again, that same expression crossed her face. Worry mixed with determination. She stood perfectly still on the sidewalk while reading a message. The city moved around her. Taxis passed. Pedestrians hurried by. A bus hissed to a stop nearby. Claire never seemed to notice. Then slowly, she smiled. Not because the message made her happy. Ethan could see that much. It was the smile of someone trying to reassure another person from far away. Someone carrying hope for more than herself. As evening approached, Ethan returned to his table. For years he had trusted facts over feelings. Data over assumptions. But every fact surrounding Claire Bennett seemed to point toward the same conclusion. Whatever secret she was hiding, it was not selfish. It was not reckless. It was not something she benefited from. And somehow that made the mystery even harder to understand. Because in a city where everyone seemed to be chasing something for themselves, Claire kept sacrificing pieces of her own life for reasons nobody could see, including him. 3 days passed, and the mystery only deepened. Ethan Caldwell was not a man who obsessed over strangers. His schedule rarely allowed it. Board meetings, investor calls, acquisition negotiations, and endless decisions usually consumed every hour of his day. Yet somehow Claire Bennett continued occupying a quiet corner of his thoughts. It was not because she was unusual. It was because she seemed determined to hide whatever made her unusual. On Friday evening, Maple and Ash was packed. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the dining room glowed beneath warm chandeliers. Claire moved from table to table with her familiar grace. She remembered names. She remembered favorite dishes. She remembered birthdays customers had mentioned months earlier. People left smiling. After speaking with her, somehow she always gave more than she received. Around 8 o'clock, a group of business executives occupied the table beside Ethan. They were loud, impatient, and clearly accustomed to getting their way. One man complained about the temperature of his steak. Another sent back a perfectly prepared side dish. Through it all, Claire remained calm. She apologized when no apology was necessary. She fixed problems she had not created. She never allowed frustration to show. Most people would have called it professionalism. Ethan saw something else. Discipline. The kind that comes from surviving difficult things. Then it happened. Claire reached into her apron for a pen and accidentally dropped a small object onto the floor. A worn leather pouch no larger than a wallet. She bent quickly to retrieve it. Too late. The pouch had already fallen open. Several items spilled across the hardwood floor. A few photographs, folded papers, and a collection of colorful crayon drawings. Claire froze. Not dramatically, just enough for Ethan to notice. For the first time since he had known her, genuine panic flashed across her face. She gathered everything quickly. One photograph slipped beneath a nearby chair. Ethan stood and picked it up before she could reach it. He expected to see family, maybe siblings, parents. Instead, the photograph showed 3 children standing together outside what looked like a public school. 2 boys and a little girl. None appeared related to Claire. Yet all 3 were smiling directly at the camera while holding a handmade sign that read, "Thank you, Claire." Before Ethan could examine it further, Claire gently accepted the picture from his hand. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice sounded different this time. More protective, more careful. Ethan nodded. "Your children?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Claire looked at the photograph, then at him. A faint smile appeared. No, that was all she said. No explanation followed. She slipped the photograph back into the pouch and secured the clasp. Moments later, she returned to work as though nothing had happened. But Ethan noticed one important detail. Every time she thought nobody was watching, her hand drifted toward the pouch. Not out of fear, out of affection, like someone carrying something precious. Later that night, after the restaurant closed, Claire sat alone in a booth for several minutes before leaving. The pouch rested beside her. She opened it carefully. Her fingers brushed over the drawings. One featured a crooked house beneath a bright yellow sun. Another showed four stick figures holding hands. Claire smiled at each one. Then she folded them neatly and returned them to the pouch. As she stood to leave, she whispered something almost too quietly to hear. I promised. The words vanished into the empty restaurant. Yet Ethan heard them. And for the first time, he realized this secret was larger than hidden bills, extra shifts, or late-night deliveries. Somewhere beyond those drawings and photographs was a promise. And Claire Bennett was sacrificing pieces of her own life to keep it. The following Tuesday, Ethan Caldwell finally did something he rarely allowed himself to do. He asked a question he could not answer with logic alone. The answer came from an unexpected source. Claire, asked Maria, the restaurant manager, while reviewing invoices in her office. One of the best people I have ever hired. Ethan sat across from her after lunch service had slowed. How long has she worked here? Almost 4 years. Maria smiled. She never calls in sick. Never complains. Never asks for favors. Honestly, I worry about her sometimes. Ethan looked up. Why? Maria leaned back in her chair. Because she takes care of everyone except herself. The word stayed with him. Later that evening, he noticed another small detail. Claire arrived carrying a reusable grocery bag filled with supplies. Juice boxes, granola bars, notebooks, colored pencils. None of it looked expensive, yet none of it looked intended for her either. Around 6 o'clock, her phone buzzed. Claire stepped into a quiet corner near the service station. Ethan could not hear the conversation. He only saw her expression. First concern, then relief, then that familiar smile. When she ended the call, she immediately opened a banking application on her phone. Hey, few quick taps. A transfer completed. Ethan recognized the motion because he had seen it before. She was sending money again. By closing time, curiosity had transformed into genuine concern. Something about Claire's life felt upside down. Most people spent their earnings improving their own circumstances. Claire seemed to funnel every spare dollar somewhere else. As the last customers departed, Ethan remained seated near the window. Rain streaked softly across the glass outside. The city shimmered beneath thousands of lights. Claire finished her closing duties and retrieved the worn leather pouch from her locker. As she placed it into her bag, something slipped free. A folded document landed near the base of the locker. Claire had already turned away. Ethan noticed it first. Claire, he called gently. She turned. But before she could reach him, a server asked for her help in the kitchen. 1 second, she replied. Ethan bent down and picked up the paper. He had no intention of reading it. Then a single line caught his attention. Foster Care Support Program. His eyes narrowed. Below the heading were 3 names. Liam Parker, Sophie Parker, Noah Parker. The same children from the photograph. Claire returned moments later and accepted the document with a grateful smile. Thank you. Ethan hesitated. Family. Claire looked down at the names. For a second, her smile softened into something deeper. Something almost painful. Something like that. Again, no explanation. Again, another piece of the puzzle. That night, after leaving the restaurant, Ethan found himself unable to let it go. Back in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, he sat alone beside floor-to-ceiling windows while Manhattan sparkled below. His assistant had once joked that Ethan could uncover the history of any corporation within hours. Yet this mystery felt entirely different. It was not about profits or strategy. It was about a woman whose life made less sense the more he learned. 3 children, regular money transfers, late-night deliveries, a promise she seemed determined to keep. Near midnight, Ethan stood and walked toward the window. The city stretched endlessly beneath him. Somewhere out there, Claire Bennett was probably preparing for another exhausting day. Another double shift. Another sacrifice nobody seemed to notice. He thought about the photograph, the drawings, the gratitude in those children's faces. Then he thought about Claire's apartment, her worn shoes, her endless work schedule. The math did not add up. Not unless she was giving away far more than she could afford. And for the first time, Ethan began to suspect that whatever secret Claire was hiding was not simply an act of kindness. It was a responsibility she had chosen. A responsibility so important that she was quietly building her entire life around it. 2 days later, the answer arrived when Ethan was not looking for it. It was nearly closing time. The dining room had thinned to only a handful of customers. Soft jazz drifted through the speakers. Outside, Manhattan glowed beneath a clear spring sky. Claire was restocking supplies near the service station when her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and immediately smiled. Not the careful smile she wore for customers. Not the reassuring smile she offered coworkers. This one was different. Genuine. Warm. Unguarded. "Hey, buddy," she answered. Her voice softened instantly. Ethan could not hear the entire conversation, but he caught fragments as he reviewed documents at his table. "How was the math test?" Claire asked. A pause. Then a quiet laugh. "I told you that you could do it." Another pause. "No, I am proud of you. Very proud." She listened for nearly a minute before speaking again. "Did Sophie finish her science project?" Another smile. "Tell her I cannot wait to see it." Ethan looked up. Liam. Sophie. The names from the foster care document. Claire ended the call and tucked her phone away. For a few seconds, she simply stood there, staring at the floor. The smile remained. Then she returned to work. Later that evening, after the restaurant closed, Ethan stepped outside. Claire was walking toward the subway entrance, carrying her familiar insulated bag. Before he could think better of it, he crossed the street. "Claire." She turned, surprised. "Mr. Caldwell." "Ethan." She smiled politely. "Ethan." He hesitated. For a man who negotiated billion-dollar deals without hesitation, this felt strangely difficult. "Can I ask you something?" Claire adjusted the strap on her bag. "You can ask." "The children." Her expression changed instantly. Not fear. Protection. "What about them?" Ethan chose his words carefully. "I know about the foster care paperwork." Silence settled between them. City lights reflected in the puddles around their feet. Traffic moved steadily in the distance. Claire looked away first. "You should not know that." "You are right." Another silence. Then Claire surprised him. She laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because she seemed tired of carrying the secret alone. "Everyone keeps assuming they are my family. They are not." Claire shook her head. "No." Ethan waited. Finally, she continued. "Their mother was my best friend." The words hung in the night air. Her name was Emily Parker. Claire's gaze drifted toward the city skyline. "We met in college." She was the kind of person who made every room brighter. A faint smile touched her lips. Years later, life became difficult for her. Very difficult. But she loved those children more than anything. Ethan remained silent. Claire took a slow breath. "Before she passed away from an illness, she asked me for something." Her voice grew quieter. "She asked me to look after them." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. "And you said yes." Claire nodded. "Of course I said yes." 3 children. 3 children. By yourself." Another nod. For almost 4 years now. The city suddenly seemed quieter. Ethan thought about the double shifts. The money transfers. The grocery bags. The late-night deliveries. The photographs. The drawings. Every piece finally connected. Claire had not been supporting relatives. She had not been helping temporarily. She had quietly devoted her life to raising 3 children who were not biologically hers because she had made a promise to a friend. "Why did you never tell anyone?" Ethan asked. Claire looked genuinely confused by the question. "Because they need help," she said softly. "Not attention." Then she smiled again. The same smile he had been trying to understand for weeks. Only now, for the first time, Ethan understood what it was hiding. After that conversation, Ethan could not stop thinking about Claire's answer. They need help, not attention. The words followed him through meetings, conference calls, and presentations. In his world, people announced every charitable donation. Companies hired public relations teams to maximize goodwill. Even generosity often came with conditions. Yet Claire had spent nearly 4 years sacrificing her time, her income, her comfort, and her future without telling anyone. The following Saturday, Maple and Ash was unusually busy. A convention at a nearby hotel had filled the restaurant from morning until night. Claire worked nonstop. By 3 in the afternoon, she had already completed one shift and immediately started another. Ethan arrived shortly before dinner service and noticed the difference right away. Claire looked tired. Not ordinary tired. Her smile remained, but it required effort now. Tiny shadows rested beneath her eyes. Her movements were still graceful, but slower. More deliberate. When she carried trays, she occasionally paused for a second before turning. Anyone else might have missed it. Ethan did not. Around 7 o'clock, her phone rang. Claire glanced at the screen and excused herself. 5 minutes later she returned. The smile was still there, but something had changed. Her eyes looked glassy. Her shoulders seemed heavier. She approached a table with the same professionalism as always. Yet Ethan noticed she forgot a customer's drink order for the first time since he had known her. Claire never forgot anything. An hour later, she stepped into the hallway near the kitchen. Through the partially open door, Ethan saw her sitting alone on an overturned supply crate. Her head rested briefly in her hands. Just for a moment. Then she straightened and stood again. The mask returned. The smile returned. The shift continued. Near closing time, Ethan was settling his bill when a young boy rushed through the front doors. He looked about 12 years old. His dark hair was messy from running. His backpack bounced against his shoulders as he searched the dining room. The moment Claire saw him, her entire face brightened. "Liam." The boy hurried over. "I am sorry," he said, slightly out of breath. The bus was late. Claire immediately knelt beside him. "Are you okay?" "Yes." He nodded quickly. "But Sophie is worried." Claire's smile faded. "Why?" Liam lowered his voice. The school called again. For the first time, genuine concern crossed Claire's face. "What happened?" "They said the payment deadline is Monday." Silence. Ethan watched from across the room. Claire looked down for a second. Then she smiled again. "We will figure it out." "But how?" Liam asked quietly. Claire brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "The same way we always do." The boy looked unconvinced. Yet he nodded anyway because he trusted her. Completely. A few minutes later, they left together. Ethan remained seated long after they were gone. Monday. Payment deadline. School. Another responsibility. Another burden resting on Claire's shoulders. The next morning, the hospital waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Outside, rain continued falling across Manhattan, turning the city lights into soft streaks of color beyond the windows. Claire sat beside Sophie Parker's bed long after visiting hours had ended. The little girl slept peacefully, a stuffed rabbit tucked beneath one arm. Liam and Noah had finally gone home with a neighbor after Claire promised she would call the moment there was news. Now, for the first time in weeks, silence surrounded her. No restaurant orders. No school forms. No grocery lists. No bills waiting to be paid. Just silence. Claire stared at a folder resting in her lap. Inside were estimates. Additional tests. Follow-up treatments. Specialist appointments. None of the numbers were impossible by themselves. Together, they felt overwhelming. Claire closed her eyes. For years she had found a way. Extra shifts. Fewer hours of sleep. Delayed plans. Sacrifices nobody noticed. Somehow she always found a way. Tonight felt different. Her phone vibrated. Another notification. Another payment reminder. Claire looked at the screen and quietly locked it again. She could not bring herself to read one more number. Across the city, Ethan Caldwell sat in his office overlooking Central Park. The lights remained on despite the late hour. A stack of reports waited on his desk untouched. Instead, he studied a different file. One containing information he had reluctantly gathered after learning about Sophie. School records. Foster care documents. Financial summaries. Nothing invasive. Nothing inappropriate. Just enough to understand the situation. The truth left him speechless. Claire's income barely covered her own expenses. Yet every year she somehow paid school costs, housing expenses, clothing, food, transportation, and countless other needs for 3 growing children. There were no hidden trust funds. No wealthy relatives. No secret support. Only Claire. One person carrying the responsibilities of 4 lives. Ethan leaned back slowly. For the first time, he understood why she always looked tired when nobody else was paying attention. Why she worked double shifts. Why she skipped meals. Why she walked instead of taking taxis. Every dollar had a destination before it ever reached her account. His phone rang. It was Maria. "I spoke with Claire," the restaurant manager said softly. "How is Sophie?" "Stable. The doctors are optimistic." Maria paused. "But Claire sounds exhausted." Ethan remained silent. "You know," Maria continued, "I offered to organize a fundraiser once." "What happened?" She thanked me and said no. Ethan was not surprised. Why? Maria laughed sadly. Because she did not want the children feeling like they were charity cases. After the call ended, Ethan stood and walked toward the window. Rain slid down the glass in slow streams. Thousands of people moved through the city below. Most would never know Claire Bennett existed. They would never know how many sacrifices hid behind her smile. They would never know how many dreams she postponed so 3 children could keep theirs. Meanwhile, across town, Claire finally looked up from the folder in her lap. Sophie shifted slightly in her sleep. The little girl's hand searched blindly across the blanket. Claire immediately reached forward and held it. Sophie's face relaxed. A small smile appeared. Claire felt something crack. Inside her chest. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough to hurt. For the first time in years, tears filled her eyes without warning. She looked away quickly, blinking them back. But there was nobody around to reassure. Nobody to protect. Nobody to smile for. And so she sat there in the quiet hospital room, holding Sophie's hand while tears slipped silently down her cheeks. It was the first time Ethan had ever been right about something he could not see. Even the strongest people eventually become tired. The next morning, sunlight finally broke through the clouds. After days of rain, Manhattan seemed brighter somehow. Streets sparkled. Storefront windows reflected blue skies. People walked a little slower, savoring the rare calm. Claire Bennett barely noticed any of it. She had spent most of the night in a hospital chair beside Sophie. When dawn arrived, she quietly helped the little girl eat breakfast, reassured Liam and Noah over the phone, and then headed straight to Maple and Ash for her shift. She was exhausted. Yet the moment she stepped through the restaurant doors, the familiar smile returned. Customers greeted her. Co-workers asked about Sophie. Claire answered every question with gratitude and optimism. She spoke about progress. She spoke about hope. She never spoke about the fear she still carried. Around noon, Maria approached her near the service station. "Claire, there is someone waiting for you in the office." Claire looked confused. "For me?" Maria nodded. "Yes." Curious, Claire walked down the hallway and opened the office door. Ethan Caldwell stood beside the desk. A folder rested in front of him. Claire stopped. "Ethan." "Hi, Claire." She glanced at the folder, then back at him. "What is this?" Ethan took a slow breath. For perhaps the first time in years, he was nervous. "Something I should have done sooner." Claire frowned slightly. "I do not understand." Ethan slid the folder toward her. "Open it." Slowly she did. The first page contained confirmation of a medical fund established for Sophie Parker. The second outlined an educational trust for Liam, Sophie, and Noah. The third guaranteed housing support until all 3 children reached adulthood. Claire stared silently. She turned another page. Then another. Her hands began to tremble. "What is this?" she whispered. "Help," Ethan said simply. Claire looked up immediately. "No." Ethan expected that answer. "Claire." No, tears filled her eyes again. "I cannot accept this." "Why?" Her voice broke. "Because I made a promise. They are my responsibility." Ethan nodded. "I know. Then you understand." "I do." He stepped closer. "And that is exactly why I am doing this." Silence filled the room. Outside, plates clinked softly in the dining room. Somewhere a customer laughed. Life continued as usual while Claire stood frozen. Ethan looked directly at her. "For 4 years, you have carried responsibilities that most people would never have accepted." Claire lowered her eyes. "I only did what Emily asked." "No," Ethan said quietly. "You did far more than that." Claire's shoulders trembled. Ethan continued. "You gave up sleep, time, opportunities, comfort, and you never asked anyone for anything." A tear slipped down her cheek. "The children never needed pity." "I know. They deserve dignity." Ethan smiled softly. "Then let us give them dignity." Claire closed her eyes. For a moment she could not speak. Years of pressure. Years of sacrifice. Years of carrying everything alone. Suddenly, she no longer had to. When she finally looked up, tears were streaming freely. Yet there was something else in her expression. Relief. Pure relief. Several months later, Sophie returned to school healthy and smiling. Liam proudly brought home grades he once thought impossible. Noah joined a community soccer team and talked endlessly about future dreams. Claire still worked at Maple and Ash. Not because she had to, because she loved it. One afternoon, Ethan stopped by for lunch. As always, Claire greeted him with a smile. The same smile customers had known for years. But now it was different. lighter, freer, no longer carrying the weight of an impossible burden alone. As she walked away to greet another table, Ethan found himself watching the dining room fill with laughter and conversation. Most people would never know Claire's story. They would never know what she had sacrificed. They would never know how many lives she quietly changed. And perhaps that was exactly the point. Because the strongest people are rarely the loudest. Sometimes they are simply the ones who keep showing up, keep caring, and keep smiling long after life has given them every reason not to.